Now it's my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Ed Arnold. Ed is Vice President of Products for Leverage Point Innovations. In his role, he manages customer relationships, provides training and coaching for new and existing customers, and provides strategic vision for the product based on his interactions with customers. He is a contributing author to the book, The ROI of Pricing. Previously, Ed held senior positions at Communispace, Diamond Management and Technology Consultants, and Omnitech Consulting Group. He holds an MBA in marketing from New York University and MA and BA degrees in political science from Boston University. So with that, Ed, welcome.
Thank you very much, Taylor, and thanks to everyone watching this webinar today. I really appreciate your interest, and you'll see a quote from my chapter in the ROI of Pricing book. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about better collaboration across functions and seeing rapid results. Specifically, I'm going to share a few insights about that might be able to help your new product launches be more successful. Companies spend billions of dollars each year in R&D and innovation in order to maintain their competitive edge. I strongly believe that all of us in product management have an important responsibility to do whatever it takes to make our products more successful. So I have 4 topics that I'll be talking about. First, the key problem with new product launches, and it's a big one. Second, the major root cause of the problem. Now, there are lots of reasons why products fail, but today I want to put the focus on a particular reason that doesn't get much attention. Then I want to share some practical ideas of how to address this problem. Things that you could start doing today that really don't require a lot of funding. And then I'll finish up with a couple of success stories. So, to begin, the problem. The problem is that we as product managers succeed in hitting the nail properly only 1 out of 4 times. This means that 3 out of 4 product launches don't hit their revenue goals, and some miss quite badly. And this is a fairly reliable statistic because it's been replicated in multiple studies. So for instance, what you see here is taken from a recent Simon-Kucher study that's described in a new book titled Monetizing Innovation, which I highly recommend. They say between 65 and 75% of new offerings fail outright or miss their revenue and profit goal. The second statistic is from the PDMA benchmarking surveys that have been going on for at least 10 years, 76%. This is a fairly constant rate over that time period. So why should you care? So at that point, you might think to yourself, well, hey, 1 out of 4 is the benchmark. That's a pretty low bar. I don't need to worry so much about my next product launch because I'll get another chance or 2. And I think that's probably a reckless and a dangerous attitude. And here's why. A few years back, we did a webinar with an executive from Parker Hannifin, which is a multi-billion-dollar industrial component manufacturer. And this is a company that introduces many new products a year. And this is what he had to say. You'll see that about 2.5% of our sales come from new product pipeline. 2.5% in the first year, 5% in the second year, 10% 4 years. You get the picture. A seemingly small piece of business grows into a large piece of business. And so for new products, it's absolutely imperative to get the value messaging right. Otherwise, you risk giving 100% of your value away. In other words, the consequences of a bad product launch are long-lasting. Your company just can't afford to have this high of a failure rate go unchecked. I mean, you wouldn't tolerate losing 3 out of 4 customers, would you? So 3 out of 4 products that aren't successful is simply not acceptable. So why do many new products fail? Well, here's one way to think about this issue. And you may recall a classic Paul Newman movie called Cool Hand Luke. And this movie has probably one of the most memorable lines ever, and I'm not going to deliver it properly in the right accent, but but I'll read it anyway. What we got here is a failure to communicate. Put another way, your product launch may end up in a ditch like our poor friend Paul here if we don't do a better job communicating to customers and salespeople. And there's research to back this up. This is a table from a white paper called Winning the Product Launch from the firm Altify, which was formerly the TAS group. And one thing that points out right away is that the #1 reason for success for new products and failure is related to accurate value propositions. And by accurate, we're talking about value propositions that are customer-centric and business-focused. Yes, there are plenty of other factors like product design and pricing that are really important, but I think the key point here is that unless the customer understands and accepts the value story, the new product offering will be passed over by customers. And our good friend and advisor, Dr. Tom Nagel, author of the classic book on pricing, would certainly agree. He wrote these words years ago, and I think they're still true today. A failure to understand value will result in a disconnect between what product teams are building, what pricing teams are pricing, what marketing is communicating, and what sales teams are selling, leading to fewer profitable sales and poor financial performance. As product managers, we own this issue. It's really up to us to create accurate value propositions. So I bet there's at least a few people in the audience right now thinking, well, hey, I already do this as a product manager. You know, I create the sales collateral and the slide decks, I put together playbooks, I do the technical documentation and training. What is really new here? Well, my answer to that would be it's not the amount of content, but rather the right type of content. Sales reps do have mountains of content available. The Aberdeen Group says that salespeople most desire value propositions that improve positioning and differentiation and tell a better, unique story. And I think story is the key word here. To me, the essence of a good value proposition means telling a story about how your product delivers tangible value to your customer. So let's net out the attributes of a good value proposition. Well, first of all, they're customer-centric. In this story, there is only one hero, and that is the customer. The product is not the hero. The customer is the hero. Think of the product as more as that helpful sidekick. It shows quantified value. Call it ROI, call it TCO, call it NPV, value added. We're all talking about quantifying the contributions to your customer's bottom line. It could be because you reduce costs, maybe you grow top line revenue, maybe you reduce risk in the business, or maybe you help the customer utilize their assets better. Data transparency is key. That means that there are no black box calculations. And these calculations need to be customized to the customer's unique situation. So a great quote I've heard recently is one size fits none. And you need to avoid those types of one size fits none quantitative proof points in your value propositions. You need to be on message. And what that means is coming down to 2 or 3 key value messages that you want to continuously hammer home. And lastly, it has to be digestible. Often that means coming up with a 1 or 2 page presentation with easy to read graphs that are intuitive and basically to be able to be presented effectively in 5 minutes or less. Now that's a pretty tall order. And I bet there are some folks out there who are thinking, well, yes, I've done that, and I've got a spreadsheet that does it, and you should see my spreadsheet. Well, we've seen lots of spreadsheets. And what I would recommend is you should see our white paper that discusses many of these issues that are related to spreadsheets. And as you can see here, there's a pretty long list. And I think from our experiences, you know, we've dissected dozens of spreadsheets. They are often complex, hard to follow. Sometimes there are actually calculation errors embedded deep into the formulas. And simply put, spreadsheets are not designed for collaboration. They're often solitary works of art. Putting them on SharePoint is not help either. It just consolidates the problem. So next I want to share with you some practical suggestions for how you as a product manager can efficiently produce effective value propositions that salespeople actually want to use. And the first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about process. So what you see here is a typical stage gate process that's used in new product development. So starting on the far left with R&D, and then marching through to the launch and the commercialization. And of course, there are multiple functions involved at the different stages, as well as a variety of product decisions made at each stage. Now, our perspective is that value quantification is embedded throughout this entire process. Certainly in the earlier phases, as you see here, the emphasis is on designing the products with features that are truly differentiating, and then making pricing decisions that allow you to maximize the amount of value capture. But as we move to the right into the pre-launch and launch phases, this is when the value model should be transformed into one of those accurate value propositions. And this is a key message here. You need to start this as early as possible. Timing is critical. And here's the reason why. This research from the Forrester Group says that the first vendor who succeeds in communicating a vision, i.e. an accurate value proposition, to executive wins the business 74% of the time. Now, 74% of the time wins the business if you can get in front of the customer with a clear, accurate value proposition. You know, I think that statistic is a little ironic because it's nearly identical to the new product failure rate, 3 out of 4. So 3 out of 4 products fail, and 3 out of 4 salespeople succeed if they can get the right value proposition in front of the customer. So hopefully I've convinced some of my product manager colleagues out there to consider upping your game when it comes to producing value props. Again, it's important to get these out as soon as possible. So what I want to do now is give you a demonstration of what a value proposition ought to look like. And for this, I'm going to go right into our leverage point application. And what we see here are many of the attributes that I highlighted of what a good value proposition is. First of all, it's very accessible and pleasing to look at. All this information is contained on one page, as you see here. It highlights value to customer pretty prominently. It shows that value in comparison to the competitive solution, which is the red bar versus the green bar. It gives you the reasons why that value is important. You'll notice that across the bottom here, you have increased productivity, resale value, operating costs, productivity improvement, all of the reasons why a customer should care. It has the key variables that relate to the customer that I can change and adjust to the customer information. And it also gives me the ability to drill down to whatever level of detail I want to. So if I want to take a closer look at increased productivity, here I see that it's related to, in this piece of equipment, bucket size, faster loading times, and there are more variables here. And there's a calculation in there that tells me what that's worth. I can drill even deeper in that, and I can even get into the calculation. So there's no black box calculations here. Everything is easy to understand and digest, and it's there when I need it. I can also get into more details with these tabs below, where I can look at other information. So this is just a quick sample of the type of value propositions that we do. We have other recorded demonstrations on our website if you want more information about that. All right, let's go back to the slides. Next, I want to talk about the process of developing value props. So we're a cloud software company, LeveragePoint. We use an agile software development process, and we do monthly releases. And we try to use that same philosophy when we work with customers and to develop value propositions. So you'll notice here that we've organized things into sprints. Now, sprints are basically very focused work efforts with a team. So for example, sprint 1 is about putting together the value model, and you have product, marketing, and pricing individuals involved with that, and they have a very focused list of tasks to accomplish, such as defining the product offering, quantifying the value, deciding what the pricing ought to be. Now, these sprints typically take 1 to 2 weeks to do, depending on the scope and time commitments. And then we move on to the next step, which is value propositions, internal validation, external validation, and then deployment. This means that you can get a value proposition out in 4 weeks, more typically 4 to 6 weeks. And having this focused approach works, having this collaborative approach works, doesn't take a whole ton of time. It's the type of work that these teams are doing anyway, but it's focused on developing value propositions and getting them out quickly. They don't have to be perfect. And so one of the things I would advise as you look at implementing such a process yourself is to avoid these 5 common mistakes when you're developing value proposition. The first one is using a half-baked or dysfunctional value model. Now, again, with some of the spreadsheets that we work with, sometimes we have to straighten this out. If your quantification is too fuzzy or complex, not only does it make a poor value proposition, but it also may point to a bad pricing decision on that product and maybe a bad offer design. So until that is worked out, it really doesn't make sense to put together a value proposition. You have to get your underlying value straight and understandable. One of the biggest insights I've had over the last couple of years is the fact that value communication is a separate task than quantifying value. So doing value communication as an afterthought in the last couple hours of the effort at the end of a long meeting doesn't make sense. It's better to separate that task. It's actually better to bring in some other team members here, marketing people, sales people, to give the type of value messaging that your product deserves. Because really, this is what the customer is going to be looking at first, even before the numbers. So pay attention and give it the proper consideration. TMI, too much information. This is the most common mistake we see, and it's an occupational hazard of building complex models. We sometimes get into the delusion, and I'm guilty of it myself, of thinking that people are dying to see all the formulas that we put together. And the reality is there aren't. At best, customers are only interested in the 20% of what you have. And it's our responsibility as product managers to decide what that 20% is and leave that 80% someplace else. It's not the job of the salesperson to figure that out. They don't have the time. Now, one of the advantages of having an online value proposition is that you can make that 80% accessible, as I showed you very quickly in that value prop demo. you can organize it so that you can get right to that piece of information about an assumption when you need it. But the important thing is not to overwhelm the customer with too much data. Another common issue that we see is what I refer to as precision anxiety, and that is waiting until you get the most perfect data. Well, the most perfect data never comes. There's almost, it's based on a belief that if you just had all the perfect data, all sales objections would just naturally fall away. But that's not really the reality. Precision doesn't win the deals, timing does. So my advice is don't wait, iterate, because all differentiation has an expiry date, and if you wait too long, it won't be there anymore. A competitor will copy it. And then lastly, working in isolation. Keeping that value proposition until it's absolutely perfect. We find that value propositions that have led a sheltered life don't live very long in the real world. You need to toughen that baby up and validate it. And again, the best way to do that is not to wait, to iterate. All right. Now in this webinar, I've referenced multiple studies, but now I want to share some of our own experiences in working with customers on value communication. So these are some leverage point case studies. And let me say, first off, that we absolutely respect and abide by our confidentiality agreements with our customers. And there are customers we don't even identify by name, but I am very happy to share a couple public success stories. And even better, these are documented on our website and recorded in webinars. So the first one I want to start off with is from Bayer Crop Science. Last November, Ingo Henneke was gracious enough to do a webinar with us. And I think his company does a fantastic job of embedding value throughout their entire stage gate process. So they do a great job in that. And the insight that came out of his experience is as follows. You know, in some cases, the team discovered differential value that wasn't reflected in the original positioning, and they realigned it. But for most cases, what the value pricing framework did is it validated their current positioning. And this increased sales confidence during negotiations with channel partners and growers. To me, I think confidence is that key word. It means it gives the sales and marketing team the confidence to stick to their guns with the initial pricing and not immediately go to the bailout with the discount. We've heard similar stories from other customers as well. So I can't share specific numbers, but there was an overall profit improvement as well as volume. That's the other interesting things that we're seeing here. And this was a theme that came up in the Professional Pricing Society conference last month, was that price and margin does not need to be a trade-off. In many cases, a better product sells at a higher price and you sell more of it because you've gotten the value right. This next success story comes from a business unit at Schneider Electric. If you're not familiar with them, they are one of the largest electrical components manufacturers in the world, and you're probably sitting within a few feet of a Schneider product. In this case study, and this comes from Laurent Gambier, he was talking about how much value they actually captured when they were going to the launch phase. And what he said was, we didn't have to be shy about our differentiation. The percentage gap between the traditional approach and the value-based approach amounted to a two-digit number, okay? So a two-digit number is a very good thing in the pricing world with that same value. So I like this idea about not being shy about differentiation. It gets at that anxiety that we as product managers have about not having the right data, or trying to be obtuse by burying our differentiation under a mountain of marketing material. Be proud, be succinct, tell you what those value messages are, and as you can see in this case study, it made a big difference. So to wrap up, in conclusion, you need to think about value early and often in the new product development process and get to the communication phase as quickly as possible. That is, start building value propositions as soon as possible. You need to work agile. You need to work collaboratively. You got to move quick, and you got to work with teams. Never wait. Iterate. It will always get better. Separate quantification from the messaging. So quantify first, pause, then develop the value messaging. And then lastly, and probably the most important thing, when you find that early success story, that first early win in your pre-launch or in your launch phase, you grab that success story and you run with it. So that wraps up my advice. If you do some of these things well, not only will you be hitting those nails consistently, you'll be hitting them just like you've been using a nail gun. All right. Taylor, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Ed, for sharing those insights. We've had a few questions come in during the webinar, and there is still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to receive a copy of How to Put a Value Tag on Your Product and be entered into a raffle for one free copy of the ROI of Pricing. All right, let's get Q&A started. To answer the most popular question myself, yes, this webinar is recorded, and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. Now, to help moderate the Q&A, I'm pleased to introduce Peyton Marshall, LeveragePoint's Chairman and CEO. Peyton.
Thanks, Taylor. Having worked with Ed for 4 years, I felt like I'd gotten to know him pretty well, just in terms of his roles and the many things he can do: product manager, advisor, trainer, coach, strategist. But today we add a new one: poet. Don't wait, iterate. I'll have to use that one myself. Anyway, thanks a lot, Ed. We have a few questions. Let's start with this one from the audience. When we launch products, often our marketing people are very concentrated on brand perception, the perception our business has as a high-quality provider to our marketplace. How do value propositions fit there?
I think they fit really well, because when you're talking about things like branding or quality, they all have an economic impact. So you think about what a strong brand means, or the reverse of that, what a weak brand means, and you go from there. So if you have, for example, higher quality equipment, say, and you're more reliable, well, for the customer, that means reducing the amount of downtime when the equipment's not working. You can actually put a cost to that. You can also look at maintenance costs, repair costs, those types of things. So I believe that a strong brand really breaks down to a lot of very tangible reasons why customers buy from you.
Great. Next one. Can you comment on how you would address a situation when your product creates a significant value for the end user, but your customer, who's between you and the end user, so this is, I sell to a party who then sells to the end user, does not gain a lot? Do you have any ideas on how to overcome that?
Yeah, this is a very common issue in the B2B world, where you're selling through, different stages of the value chain. And, the most important thing there is to recognize that value is different. The same exact feature, if you have, say, for example, a lighter weight material, and you're selling it to a company that makes parts, that in turn sells it to an aircraft manufacturer, that in turn sells it to an airline, there's a whole chain of benefits that go through there. So you need to understand what value means to each one of them. But often what it means is that even if the end user, the airline, gets the ultimate value in fuel savings, there is value to you as a supplier for having that material and being able to work with that material. So that value may often turns up in being a preferred supplier, larger orders, maybe a higher price or less discounts on your product.
Great, thanks. So this is an organizational question on how do you, so the pricing dimension of this one is how do you move from cost plus pricing to value pricing? Or maybe the marketing version of the question is, how do I get other people motivated to do value propositions? So what can you say about other companies' experiences, but the actual quantitative ROI of doing value propositions as part of a product launch?
Well, it's well worth the effort, and we actually, in the ROI of pricing chapter that I wrote, we put together a case study where we looked at the impact of that. And one quote that comes directly out of that study said that as a result of that, companies saw a 2 to 4% increase in gross margin. Now, if that isn't the motivator, I don't know what is.
Great. So how long does it take to construct a good value proposition?
Well, we can do them very, very quickly. So the slide that I showed that had the agile approach had a four-week schedule. That means that within the second week, you have a draft value proposition developed that you can begin to test. Now, one thing you don't want to do is in the second week, take that value proposition out and use it on a major deal. You do want to iterate that. And so the other two phases is a process of getting that internal validation and then an external validation. But you can move these things as quickly as you want to. It's just a matter of commitment and resources. Good.
We have some questions that have come in really about sort of more of the pre-launch and R&D period. It's really, this one is about how do you embed, so it's really how do you embed value early in the stage gate process? And I think part of this question is in your R&D processes, you don't really know the product specs yet. How do you quantify that?
Well, I think the value modeling process actually helps a great deal to organize the thought process, because you are making decisions about what features and functionality you're putting into product. Even if it's a brand new product, it's based on some sort of value hypothesis. And what's nice about using a value model to do that is that you can very easily begin to brainstorm and map features, benefits to value impacts, and then begin to prioritize them. And I think the earlier you do it, the more time you save in the later stages. You don't want to be heavily invested in a feature and find out later that customers may like it, but not willing to pay additional price for that. And you may have put a lot of your R&D and budget into developing it. So that's what that eliminates. So doing that modeling early is very valuable.
So I've mentioned value in sales to my compliance and legal people, and they've indicated some resistance. What do you do about that?
Well, my first response is that it's no different than any other marketing content that you vet with compliance. You have to go through the same process. But Peyton, you're a former CFO, and you have dealt with this. I would be curious about what your thoughts would be.
It's an interesting question. As you say, product materials claims, it's a standard marketing challenge for any product in any industry. And every industry is a little different. The very high standards that are probably set in healthcare with the FDA and DDMAC may actually make the issue somewhat different from other sectors. But I think there are a bunch of things to realize. The first thing to realize is that the problem isn't the value proposition. The problem is often spreading and relatively under-regulated spreadsheets, because so often the business case needs to be made in the sales process that it will just happen. And so the important thing I think I'd start with my compliance department is, how do I give my salespeople something that actually has been thought through, has been vetted, it has disclaimers on it, and I've quoted some decent sources. So the problem, I think, more often than not, is really the quality of what's out there. It's not the value propositions themselves. And having some way to standardize a publication process for what's a live tool, to make sure there's good quality control, to make sure it's well improved, to make sure there's good disclaimer language. That's the best way really to get compliance and legal on board, is to take those steps proactively. Let's see. Next question. There are a few questions about organizational roles. One is kind of a little bit more of a marketing role kind of question. So when it comes to building value propositions and building quantified value tools, how should we get started, and whose job should it be?
Mm-hmm. Well, my own feeling is that, and what we've seen with companies, is that product managers need to take that leadership role in driving that process. And it's their responsibility to pull together the team, whether it's marketing or get input from sales or pricing or elsewhere, to begin that process of modeling and iterating. Now, we've seen other people fulfill that role. You don't necessarily need to be a product manager. We've seen project managers. We've seen Six Sigma type of managers do this type of role. And I think the main thing is, behaviorally, you need to be committed and drive through to get that information and collaborate with the team and document it. I think one thing that the value modeling process does very well is that it pulls in a lot of the great ideas that a team has and puts it into something that you could actually work and see, and the output of that goes directly into the value proposition. And I think you need to be committed to the eye on the prize and really make sure that's happening. There's no point in going through this exercise if it doesn't get in front of a customer. Ultimately that's important. So you need to realize that's important and deliver upon it.
So here's an organizational question, related one, saying, shouldn't this be sales jobs? And it's coming from someone who said, I saw a sales rep the other day, a good sales rep, do some simple math almost on a napkin or on a whiteboard. Shouldn't we be getting sales to quantify value?
Well, I think any salesperson who does that is worth their weight in gold. So the first thing I would do is spend more time, because that is probably a successful salesperson. That's probably a person who really knows how to translate the value messages into something that's relevant to the customer. But the real answer is, it's really not their job to do that. It's really the product marketing team to put that together. Now, they need to get that input from salespeople. So I see salespeople as being great internal validators of logic and numbers. They will tell you very quickly whether something is bogus or not, and they know best. Now, if you have a salesperson who's already doing this sort of thing, I think that's a great way to get started, because it's a question of scaling what they've done and building upon it.
Good. So here's a hard one. With 2.5% increase, say, in revenue or margins per year from new products, or with 2.5% now in revenue, how would you recommend focusing value pricing and value communication efforts, new product launches versus existing business?
That's a great question. So companies that are heavily investing in R&D and innovation make new products their priority, because it really is their future, because you only have that one chance to get established in the marketplace at the right positioning and the right price. Now, what we've been seeing with our customers at LeveragePoint is, now that they've gotten embedded in StageGate, they do want to look at their broader portfolio. And we're seeing a lot more interest in there, because some of your mainstay products, especially in maintaining customer relationships, are really important. So, I think it really depends on your company situation. But I see more and more companies doing new products, definitely, and then strategic products in their portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I think my reflection on that one might be the mix has a lot to do with this mix of strategic products. Mm-hmm. And invariably, you see new products, or many new products, are strategic, but often they're core and sort of anchor or platform products. And so one thing that sometimes you'll see is that value gets focused on that kind of core and platform product, sometimes with the idea that you establish value there, often with existing customers. And then you're really looking with those customers to layer in extra value from the next strategic product. And so one of the things we do see are solution consultants starting with the core and building out from there. But the most important thing when you're talking about where to start is you start somewhere where it matters, and you start somewhere where it can be successful.
Right.
So, you were recently at PPS, Ed. Mm-hmm. So, questions here about pricing systems. So I'll break it into two questions. First is, what's more important, pricing analytics done through price management systems, or value pricing and value propositions?
Okay. So if we're talking new products, then price management or analytics isn't going to be of much use, because you don't have the transaction data to analyze it. So I think value propositions, value models are way more important with new products. In terms of existing products, it really depends on the company. Companies definitely need to have tight price management systems in terms of managing discounts and margins, and especially in this type of slow growth economic climate, that's really important. And companies spend a lot of money on these types of systems. The value propositions, in comparison, is a low spend and is actually faster in terms of what kind of results you are. So I don't see those as being a trade-off. I think companies ought to be doing both.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you're talking about existing products, the pricing analytics tools help you understand the data and make continuing decisions. The value proposition helps sales sell, and those are complementary roles. So interesting. Okay, the other kind of question of this nature is really about, how do you think about value propositions as compared to CPQ and CPQ systems?
Oh, the configure price quote systems.
Yeah.
It was interesting at PPS. I've been away from a PPS conference for a few years, and when I came back last month, I was surprised, or one of the things I learned was that CPQ is a much bigger play now in the pricing world. And so a lot of companies are looking into those systems. And again, I think, you know, it depends type of situation. You know, the thing I would be thinking about is where are you leaving money on the table? CPQ systems are all about sales efficiency, you know, getting quotes out as quickly as possible. That was my takeaway from PPS. You know, if I can respond to a customer quicker with a standard proposal, I win the game. Now, and that's undoubtedly true, but are you leaving money on the table because of the deals and efficiency, or are you leaving the money on the table because you're not communicating value? You know, if you get the bid in front of the customer, but the customer, you know, pushes you on the discount because you haven't gotten the value messages across, or they're just using you to, you know, compare you to another competitor, that doesn't do much in terms of your positioning as a product. So I think they're complementary types of systems.
Yeah, you know, I think that's right. If you think about CPQ right now, CPQ is all about making more efficient this world of increasing customization of solutions. And as that happens, you know, CPQ helps sell through speed. What value propositions do is they help sell through making business case. And so again, they're complementary, and I don't think there's much doubt about that. I think we have time for one more, and this one's near and dear to our heart, Ed. So in constructing a value model and in capturing information in the actual model, and I'll ask you, because that's where the question comes from, do you use an Excel to accompany your calculations, capture assumptions, et cetera?
No.
What is that's almost a set up to the leverage point commercial.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, Peyton and I have converted a lot of spreadsheets into leverage point models, and you know, there's huge advantages to having something in a common database that's searchable and you know, maintainable and just accessible. You know, when you rip apart a spreadsheet that has, you know, layers of lookup tables and whatnot, Lord knows what's in there. And so you don't need to have offline tools to accompany a value model. They could all be embedded into the common database, and there's a huge amount of advantages in terms of security, accessibility, all those reasons that we cited in the white paper about the spreadsheets.
Okay, well, thanks, and thanks everyone for being with us on these questions. I'm afraid we probably don't rise to the standards of Dr. Zeus or Muhammad Ali. Don't wait, iterate, snooze and you lose. But anyway, back to you, Taylor.
Thank you, Peyton and Ed. And just a brief reminder before you go, we are hosting another webinar next month, Generate B2B Value Propositions for Sales Team Adoption. And Peyton will be hosting that webinar for you all. And if you're interested in registering for this webinar, please check the appropriate box in the exit survey. And that's it from us for today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Ed for his insights. And from all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week and take care.